Well, hallelujah. God bless you, and thank you for joining us for the New Man News Network. We're glad you're here with us. My name is Aaron Agnew, and I'm here with Dr. Amalia Agnew, my beautiful bride, my wife, my helpmeet. I'm not going to go too far. Welcome again to the show, Dr. Agnew.
God bless you.
Amen. Well, we're here again with Life and Ministry Part 2. We want to continue in the conversation. I know we have a lot of friends out there who are really interested in the conversation we were having on last time. And then I wanted to ask you all to help me come up with a title for this show, dealing with the family. You know, I thought about maybe traveling with the Agnews, because we are traveling. We're pilgrims, we're sojourners, and we're just traveling through. But then life and ministry, because we're going to be coming with some shows. I mean, maybe even weekly, we can come on and start doing this more and more. Yeah. But without further ado, I don't want to prolong the time. We want to get back to the conversation we were having the last time we were together. We started out with where you were born. I think we did.
Yes, sir.
And we discussed a little bit about some historical facts of what happened to your grandparents and on your father's side.
Yes.
And we ended up not dealing with a few things that I wanted to bring back up concerning your father's family and what happened during World War II, which you only have, you know, some information about it. You weren't there, but your father, your grandfather, your grandmother told you many things. So I wanted to just backtrack and just rewind back to what happened during World War II with your family on your father's side and kind of the timeline of when that was.
So World War II was from 1940 to 1945. And as I was mentioning what happened on the last show, I thought, wow, 45 is when my grandfather took that walk that I mentioned, the walk of the dead. And he made it. Well, the amazing part is that he made it, and because he made it, my father was born 3 years later. So after all the atrocity and the physical abnormalities that rose from being in the camp, he was still able to have a son in 1948, which was my father.
Wow.
And I thought that was amazing, and how close it could have been that my father wouldn't have been here and I wouldn't have been here.
Wow. Things that we don't think about.
Right.
So your grandfather during World War II as a prisoner of war in Germany and took the walk of the dead.
La Marche des Morts.
Okay. And so that was 45, and your father was born in 48.
Right.
Wow. Without getting into too many details of how that happened and what all happened, we talked about your father's family, but what about your mother's family? What was going on with them during World War II?
So my mother's family, my grandparents took a little different approach. My grandfather, the father of my mother, was very, very intelligent, genius, I can say. And he could see from afar what was going to happen before it happened with Hitler and his plan. So he decided to make himself a fake identity card, and wrote in German in it, and he taught himself German without an accent. So he decided, if I get arrested, or if they start arresting other people but the Jews in the resistance, I will just, answer them in German and it will help me. So he went around, created a fake name, And he went around talking German to himself to make sure his name, his French name, wouldn't come up. Because usually when somebody asks you, what's your name? It's so natural, you're going to say it. So he would go around and say his name. And what happened, one day he was, I guess, walking down the street, and they arrested 12 men. They pulled over, not arrested, but pulled over 12 men. And they lined them up in front of a wall. And they went from one man, my grandfather was the last one on the wall. And they went from one man to the other and asked them questions. And the Nazis had a gun, and they shot one man after the other. And one man after the other collapsed. And it got to my grandfather, number 12. Now they just, imagine, I was thinking the stress he was in, because they just shot in the head and 11 men collapsed, and here he is standing, and he has the gun pointed at him, and they ask him the same question, and he showed his German ID, and he started speaking to them in German, and he understood everything they said, and they let him go. There was I don't know the time frame, that was between 1940 and 1945. In 1948, he had my mom. So on both sides of my family, it was a really close call for my parents not to be born, and therefore for me not to be born.
Wow. Yeah. I had the privilege of meeting both your grandmother on your father's side and your grandfather on your mother's side, and had an opportunity to hear some of the stories and testimonies. And it was amazing to hear your grandfather talk about that situation, that he taught himself German and escaped the bullet, basically. The bullet. And now you're here,
yes.
Your parents being born 3 years after the war is over with on both sides, yes. And having no other children.
Right.
So they're only children.
Yes, absolutely.
And your grandparents were only children.
Yes, sir.
And so it's like, what? So I'm so happy and so glad that you're here right now with me in light of all of that. So your parents are still living today.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any thoughts, or have you ever communicated with them about their thoughts concerning their history and the war and everything that went on from their perspective?
I have recently with my father. My mother, not so much, but with my father, I have recently sat down with him and asked him some questions. However, I don't really want to go too deep into the atrocities that were committed in the camps, simply because it's a possibility to cause hatred. My father gave me a binder maybe 15 years ago, where I have all the letters and all the pictures and all the medals and everything, the communication between him and my grandmother and his, parents and her parents, and just so much information. And I've never looked at it, because for me, it's not gonna help anything. It's a beautiful piece of history, but I don't have the need to look at it at this point of life. I have it, it's great, it's accessible if need be, but I don't have the desire to look at it at this point.
Sure. We discussed quite a bit on the last show, and some will have to go back and listen to it to be able to catch up to where we are. And I remember us talking about your 14-year-old experience, yes, when you were 14 years of age. But even leading up to that 14 years of age, I was thinking personally, I said, I don't have an idea, and I asked you on the last show about not believing in a God, a divine being, a supernatural being, even people thinking themselves to be a God. I don't have an idea of it, and some of our audience may have that idea, but I just thought about recently how me growing up in the United States of America, especially in the South, what we call the Bible Belt, people went to what they call church, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. People believed in a God. Even people who didn't go to church, it's like it was normal that everybody believed in God, you would think. But for you, there was not the belief. What is the difference of life for a person who doesn't believe in God versus a person who does? I mean, which, there's so many things I can bring up, but what are some of the differences you can think of?
Well, it's a whole lot of pressure on yourself because everything falls upon what you think, what you say, and what you do. There is no outside influence. It's all about you. And so it's so much pressure to the extent where at some point it won't last. You're not gonna be able to last. It's going to affect your physical body. It's gonna take a toll on your physical body. And I realized that. That's what I was trying to find a solution at some point, close to being 30. I knew I'm not gonna last with that much hatred and that much anger and that much. I could feel my body at close to 30, which is young. I could feel my body was taking hits just because of everything I was going through, even though on the outside it looked quite great, but I knew what was going on inside. However, the amazing part for me when I look back is the hands of God were, it was a protection around me, all along. So I remember going to Australia when I was 18. After I graduated from high school, I became an exchange student and I went to live in Australia for a year. And being away, no cell phone. I traveled the world without a cell phone. I remember those big phone that you go to the airport and you have to press the phone booth. And I had, no access to technology like we do. So I was in Australia, and in Australia there is a historical place. It was a prison, and you go and visit it. It's no longer a prison, and you go and visit the prison. I went, and a week later from my visit there, it was a major event that happened. A young man shot 45 people, point blank. He went around, around the prison and just shot the visitors, people who visit the site, the historical site. Well, a week prior to that, I was there. I could have been there, but I wasn't. And another thing that happened is I went to visit. Australia has magnificent beach and, on the ocean. It's dunes for miles of miles of miles with nothing but sand and water. It's nothing around. I had a friend in high school, and she told me, hey, I want to take you to a place that's just amazing. And I was, like I said, very adventurous. So I said, yeah, let's go. So we drove for hours with a little Jeep. She had a little Jeep. And then she parked in the middle of nowhere. You could see all the dunes and the ocean, and it was just amazing. And I had, back then, I know better now, but back then, I had this feeling inside. And I told her, I said, somebody's watching us. She said, oh, you just paranoid, be quiet. And nobody's watching us. I said, no, somebody's watching us. I said, I'm not comfortable. We got to get back in that car. So she said, oh, you such a party pooper. Come on, let's get back in that car. She called me all kind of names because she thought, you know, you're a chicken. So I got back in the car and we drove off. The next day, at that same spot, they found a young girl in her 20s that had been stabbed 50 times by that same guy that killed 45 people. He was a serial killer. He was at that same spot that we were. And I know for a fact that he was watching us. And had we not got back on that Jeep, you know, it's pretty obvious what would have happened. So I think about all those things, all those stories, and I said, God has his hands of protection around me the whole time. That even though I didn't even know he existed, I didn't acknowledge him at all. He had a plan for my life, and he had to do certain things for that plan to happen. And I thought it amazing when I think about it.
It's very amazing. All of this happened after you were 14.
Right.
Which at 14 is when you had two great experiences. One of questioning your thoughts about life and purpose.
Yes.
And the other about the prophetic word over your life, which you didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And then to have the type of experiences to prove that all along there's the mercy and the grace of God, even for people who are sinners and unbelievers. Not just them, but people who would even say there is no God, fools.
Right.
The scripture says that God lets his sun rise on the just and the unjust. So it doesn't matter who a person is. It's amazing. But, you know, you talked about the hatred. And in America, of course, we deal with a lot of hatred. Not just people who don't believe in God, people who believe in God.
Right.
Living after the flesh, they have a lot of hatred in their hearts. Give us an example as an unbeliever of what hatred looks like from the perspective of an unbeliever. I mean, what's the difference?
Well, it's, I remember being taught while I was growing up, I'm thinking in French, un bon arabe est un arabe mort. A good Arab is a dead Arab. That's what I was told. I think that's the peak of hatred. And that's what you deal with. Everything that's not, everything and everybody that's not like you, that doesn't fit your category, your class, your nationality, it has to be eliminated. And the extent of elimination, it depends on the morality of the person. Some will actually go all the way to trying to kill other people, and some will just live somewhere else so they don't have to deal with those people. But the hatred is, of course, there, and racism, of course, is there and is being taught. And even in the high school I went to, my parents wanted me to have a good education, and they put me in one of the top high school of the town. And so it was a lot of people from children from doctors and lawyers, and they, you know, higher higher class. So they all came and in their Mercedes and BMW, and my mom had this little red car that starts, once in a while. And I would think, oh my goodness, you got all these people with these fancy cars, and here we are with this little red car. One time we went to the car wash and we lost the light, the light from the car, because it's not in the car, it's sticking out off of the car. It's attached to the car. And when we came out of the car wash, the light was in the car wash. So it was really one of those cars that was made that it was a really funny looking car, but you wouldn't expect people with a car like that to show up at that kind of high school. And so I experienced the class and the race and all that, all those distinctions. I felt it all of
Sure.
it. Mm-hmm.
So these couple of experiences you had, I was talking to someone just the other day about something you said. You were sitting down at 14 years old, mm-hmm. and you were thinking about Darwin theory. I was thinking, how many 14-year-olds out there just sitting down thinking about Darwin theory? And you questioned
Yes.
The monkeys'
mm-hmm.
evolution,
Yes.
and why they stopped evolving.
Right.
And you had this great experience with your parents of your life and everything. And from that moment, moving forward, you began to have more experiences in life. You mentioned a couple of them in Australia, where the devil didn't want you to be here today.
Obviously. Mm-hmm.
And but what goes on after that? I mean, after that 14-year-old experience, take us through some steps of how life was going forward, your travels, mm-hmm. Experiencing life in different ways, different places. Take us on that journey.
So at 15, I traveled for the first time by myself. I went to England for 2 weeks, and I stayed with a host family. And it was a great experience, but it was still, to me, I mean, it wasn't that close to home, but to me it was still, somewhat close. And after that, I met a lot of people from America, because I would always go and see basketball games in Belgium, and I would meet people. I would talk to people and meet people, and then they would tell me, hey, why don't you come and visit us during the summer while you off of school? They say, all you got to do is get the plane ticket, and we'll take care of you when you get there. And to me, it was like, oh, this is such a great opportunity. Let's go for it. So I would get a plane ticket and just go and visit people all over the place. And it was so amazing, because some people I visited, I remember a couple, I went to visit them. They lived in Oakland. And that trip was just a discovery of what the hood is in America. I wasn't familiar with that at all. I mean, I'm from a little village called Nimi. So she took me to so many places, and I found I was like, wow, I was discovering. And I was really brave. And one time I remember she took me to Palo Alto. Her mother lived in Palo Alto. It was East Palo Alto. And we we visited with her mother, and then got back in the car, and it's like midnight, and we have to drive back to where she lived with her husband. And all of a sudden, behind a alley just ran 5 guys, and they shooting at each other, and I'm like, oh my God. She said, it's the hood, don't worry about it. I said, they shooting at each other. She said, yeah, that's the neighborhood. And she just pulled out and just started driving. And I'm like, what is wrong with this woman? So it was just not knowing that the Lord was preparing me for living in Little Rock on Asher. I just didn't know what he was doing with me. And then one day, I always was very adventurous, and I wanted the full experience. And she was one of these women that had all kind of stuff going on: fake nails, fake hair, fake eyelashes. And she said, "You want fake nails?" I said, "Sure, I do. Let's go for it." And she dropped me in this little, broke down nail salon in the middle of Oakland, the worst part of Oakland, and left me there and said, "I'll come back and pick you up." Mind you, I don't know the Lord, so I see flesh. And I was the only white person back then, again, disclaimer, I was in the flesh, sitting there, and all these women were looking at me. And I said, this is not going to end well. And so I just sat there, got my nail done, and then she came back and picked me up. She said, "You had a good time?" "Oh, it looks pretty." I said, "Yes, I had a great time, but I was a little scared for a minute because they looked at me like they didn't really like me." She said, "Oh, they're going to be all right." She said, "You hungry?" I said, "Sure." Now, she always managed to take me to those places at night. It was 8 o'clock, and she said, "Let's go to that little burger place over there." I wouldn't even have thought that it was a place where you want to eat. So, but again, I was adventurous, so I went with her, and we were sitting down eating a burger, and they just started shutting the doors and the windows, and I'm like, what are they doing? She said, they have to lock the doors because otherwise, the gangs will come and break everything down. I say, okay, we're still in here and the car is out there. That means we have to go from here to the car. And she said, yeah, just don't worry about it. I said, it's like a war zone. What are you talking about? Don't worry about it. And again, when I think about all those experiences, I say, oh my goodness. From 14, he was preparing me. The whole time, everything was a preparing moment for me to be able to accomplish the purpose of God on my life.
Yeah. Traveling with the Agnews. He was preparing you for traveling with the Agnews. We have many experiences. They call them culture shocks in the world.
Absolutely.
And I'm just thinking about, how you grew up, where you grew up, and how things were. And maybe people might not understand. You're giving an expression, an example of what you saw and what you experienced, but even in the midst of that, you were experiencing some things growing up that people didn't experience in America. How about that?
Growing up, it's so much. What is it? Something in particular?
Television.
Oh, yes.
Life
yes,
in
sir.
Belgium.
Absolutely. So in Belgium, there was no censor on TV. So I was used to seeing, you have a toothpaste commercial and there's a naked woman that does the commercial. It was just everywhere. Everywhere you turn, you have the red light district. Even a little village that I grew up in had a red light district. A red light district, I don't know if anybody is familiar with that, but it's basically prostitution on display. You have women at the windows with the neons that are almost naked and sell themselves, and whoever can come in the house and buy sex. And so, but even in a little village, you have that, and you grow up like that. And I didn't know there was anything different. I thought everything was like that everywhere else. I was just used to it. Back then, man with men, woman with women, very open. Just they were not hiding. It was just you go down the street, you see that. So it was, we had drugs, it was already being legalized, abortion. It was just, everything was happening now. The beginning of what's happening now in the U.S., it was already happening over there. So it desensitizes you to a whole lot of sin. It's just, you think it's normal. You think it's, for example, in high school, nobody got pregnant. We had no teen pregnancy. I never heard of such a term until I moved to the U.S. Why? Because you get on contraception, you have sex, it's normal, nobody talks about it, no big deal. I mean, it's just like nobody is hiding, nobody is like, hey, talk, secret talks, and no, it's just normal. Nobody talks about it. You have boyfriends, it's just a different world.
It's amazing how we're moving in that direction.
Absolutely.
And in Europe, you talked about the hood and the experiences of the gangs and all of the problems in neighborhoods that are not as affluent or just the total opposite. But you all had terrorism.
Oh, yes.
So extreme crime,
Yes, absolutely.
extreme sin. What is the response to sin? I mean, even we're talking about a national thing. I mean, people all over the country and all over the continent of Europe, it's a normal thing. You're right next door to Amsterdam,
Right.
to the Netherlands and Amsterdam, which was sin on steroids. And you're right over France. You're right next to Switzerland. I mean, all the crime scene is right there in your continent. I'm sure sin meant nothing to you growing up. So you say it was a desensitizing, but I mean, what is it to, I'm just asking because I don't understand. What is the thoughts going through people's heads when it comes to sin?
Well, in my case, and I'm not saying I don't want to make a general statement because I was familiar with the area and the people that my parents were around. You don't think about it as sin. You think it to be normal. You don't see it as something that you don't see it as sin. It's just normal way of life. It's just what people do and what people don't do. I remember I had a friend, and he was his parents were from Sicily, and I asked him one time, I said, hey, you don't really believe that the mob system, how they operate, you don't really believe that that's how it should be? And he said, absolutely. You kill my cousin, I kill yours. That's how you should operate. That's perfect justice. That's really what he believed. He really believed that this is what you should do. And in my case, it was the same. I really just believe that this is the way of life. This is how things go. It never crossed my mind that things don't happen that way everywhere else, and it's actually a sin factor operating in people who are not believers. I never thought about that. I just thought that's human. That's what humans do. That's how humans are. And so you go into studying psychology, and you study people's behavior, and you study the influence of people's childhood into why they became who they became. And then I would be interested in seeing what happened with a serial killer, what happened in his head, what caused him. But never once did I get an answer until I understood, hey, we were born in sin. So you're using feelings and affections, and you cutting off the spirit part, but you just focusing on body and soul to explain things, which is a total failure, of course.
It's amazing because so many believers are operating with that same mind, even though they're believers in the Lord Jesus.
Yes, sir.
And coming from your perspective, since you've had those experiences in life where you didn't know sin and now you do, there's a total change up in the way that you look to see things. You're not trying to see it like you did. One more example of the cultural clashes, if we may. Going to Oakland was not your first time in America.
No, sir.
Right. And so what was it like visiting America the very first time you visited America?
I'm 14 and I say I'm going to move to the U.S. So based on that, I become in love with the U.S. You couldn't tell me anything about the U.S. because I just knew inside that I believe what I said at 14, again, not knowing where it came from. So you couldn't tell me anything wrong of it. I remember at 17, that's the first time I came to the U.S. Before I came, oh my goodness, people talk to me, they say, you better get a bulletproof jacket. You better get some food too because all they eat is hamburgers. I mean, those cliches. They just describe it as though, and don't you fall into this dumb Americans that believe that we come from Adam and Eve. I mean, it was just terrible. It just seemed like I was preparing to go to war. That's what I felt like. And so, but I didn't care. I didn't listen. I said, I know it got to be this great place. And so 17, I'm on my way. I flew for the first time too. I did Brussels, London, New York. My host family lived in New Jersey. It's called Nationic Station, New Jersey. And it's kind of like a country, a little bit, not completely country, but a little bit. And they had, I was there for 3 days, and it was July 4th after 3 days. And they were very patriotic. Which Belgium, they're not patriotic at all. I didn't even know I didn't know there was a national anthem. I didn't know anything. Probably the only thing I knew is that we had a king. I mean, just people, it was terrible. But then I come to the U.S. and I end up in a host family that is super patriotic. The girls, they had 5 girls. The girls had the American flag as earrings. They had the bow. They had, I mean, everything was white, blue, and red. They had the cornfield in the bag. It was like, whoa, this is big. And they had the fireworks, and they had the knowledge of what Independence Day was, because some people, they just after the fireworks and the hot dogs, but they actually had both. And so I was